So let me guess. You've spoken to a few users, you got some stories written, you collected those stories, made them into epics, you bundled them together, you ran some sprints using a Kanban board, you held some stand up meetings, you built some software during those sprints, and you're ready now to have a first set of users come and use that software, which means you're ready to run a beta. So in this episode, let's figure out what it takes to actually run a beta, as well as a few tips that I've learned from my own career. Righto, so running a beta. A beta, they're incomplete versions of software released to gather user feedback. Most betas are run using an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, which is a bare bones product that has just the minimum required features, just enough to gather user feedback. 3 steps. Find and nurture an audience using content, set a launch date and build some hype, release your MVP, and listen in closely for bugs. Now, the reason, obviously we'll go through these steps, but one thing that I've noticed, and a mistake that most people have probably been doing all their lives, especially software developers, is that they've never found or nurtured audiences, right? You need an audience to use your beta. And you need to create some hype for it. You can't just expect to build software and then have hundreds of people come and use your software unless you've built an audience for it in the first place. So you have to build and nurture an audience, and obviously Abhinav will help you out on the marketing end of things to build that audience, but this is how you do it. Now, one of the things we mentioned is instant communication. You need to keep gathering feedback. This is the last step, right? You need to listen in closely for user feedback and for bugs. So you have to keep them engaged, but they're busy. So what you do is you use a chat widget like Drift, which is free. You can also use Intercom. I think that's also free for a starter plan. And you have to use it to gather real-time feedback. You will need 500 to 1,000 beta testers for a business to consumer, which is B2C app, and maybe 5 to 10 beta testers for a B2B app. And we've spoken about B2B and B2C in the past. So, if you don't know what that is, refresh your memory or use Uncle Google, right? So you have to interview your beta customers, post their time with the tool too. This is something that product guys, they forget. They're just like, okay, I'm going to have somebody use my software and then I'm never going to call them again because I need 500 people using my software. But the truth is that you only need a handful and you need their absolute full attention, and then you need their feedback. So you have to do this, and there's this element of watching your cohorts, which we'll come to in a bit. So when it comes to your beta, this is how your funnels are going to look. 100% of the people are going to come to your homepage. Maybe 50% will come to your registration page, 20% are going to start registration, and just 10% will finish your registration. Right now, these are random stats that I took there. The numbers are even worse for most companies, but you have to separate these funnels by audience source. That you have to be tracking every event that happens, and you can use Google Analytics to set event triggers. Just ask your developer to set event triggers on every action that somebody takes. Right? But Google Analytics by default tracks event visits or page visits, and that's normal. So you have to separate these funnels by audience source. For example, traffic coming from YouTube might have a much higher conversion rate than traffic coming from, say, Times of India. Say if your product is something that is used by 20-year-olds, you're obviously not going to expect a traffic source that's utilized by 55-year-olds, maybe an old regional newspaper. That traffic is not going to convert very well, is it? Spend more on advertising in areas with higher converting funnels. Change your product to improve funnel conversion rate. And then finally, validate hypotheses. You never know what works. The audience is irrational and you have to be water, just like Bruce Lee. Right? And I think I've brought up this quote multiple times, but being able to adapt to your audience, very, very, very important. You don't know what they will like until they tell you that they like it, but they show you that they like it. So this is an example of what we did at JobSpire. And here's an article about that on a site called Let's Intern. But we used to have a 7.56 completion rate when we had our sign-up form. And at that point, we were asking people to submit all of their information on our sign-up form, including, their date of birth, their CV, their expected CTC, a lot of different features, a lot of different things, right? But people are a little bit lazy. When they see a form with 20 fields, they just don't want to fill it in. So what we did was we broke that form into 2 parts. The first part, we just asked people for their email ID and their name. We said, email ID and name, find a job now. Then people clicked on find a job now, and then we sent them to a second part of the form where we asked them for more details. We asked them for details like, okay, date of birth and CV and all of those things that we used to ask in the first form. Because of this, because people have already put in a little bit of effort by entering their name and their email ID, they went ahead and completed the entire form, right? Or more people went ahead and completed the entire form. Just that little bit of effort they put in the beginning forced them to put in a little more effort to fill out the entire form. That's why our conversion or completion rate went from 7.56% to 12.75% when we split the form into two halves, right? This is just an example of how you can improve your product to do better, and this you will understand only by looking at event metrics. These two screenshots are from an app called Mixpanel. So here are cohorts, and this is the most powerful report that you could probably get. It's available in Google Analytics for free. It denotes retention over time. If your cohorts are good, especially in the first month or 2 months, you are sitting on potentially a multi-million-dollar product company. Now, cohorts essentially means that, a person who came in on day one, how long does that person stay? Does that set of audience come back on day 2? Do they come back on day 3? Do they come back on day 4? And as you can see in this particular graph, and I took this from somewhere, on April 3rd, you can see something good happened. So the audience that came in on day 1, they continued to be better retained on day 2, and they continued to come back on day 3. So understanding your cohorts is important because you'll be able to see how many people come back to your platform. Because at the end of the day, products are only good if they have retention. If somebody's coming on your product just once and never again, you are never going to run a successful business or a successful startup. It's never going to be a successful product. You need repeat customers, and cohorts are a measure of how many people came back. So in this particular example, the person should look at the features released on April 3rd or whatever event happened on April 3rd or whatever traffic source was available on April 3rd and do some more research on it, right? So this person actually went ahead and did that. And you can see that on April 3rd, you can see the sources and behavior of those users. So you can see that this person, some people came directly, some people came from Google, some people came from YouTube. So this is how things happen on April 3rd for them. So this is how you dig deeper into your stats. Correlation is not causation. You guys have studied statistics, especially if you're a part of the Meta platform. Statistics part is free. So you know that correlation does not mean causation. So dive deeper and see if you can repeat it. If you can replicate something again and again and again, it is more likely to be true. So if you can do some more reading at this link, you can download this slide deck, do some more reading where this person talks about how their cohorts works and what insights they had from it. So thank you to this person. If you click on the link, you'll probably I'll be able to give credit to this person. Right, so most startups have, or most products, or most companies, even if you're working in a big company like Google and you have some new product that you're releasing, this is how the hockey stick looks. For the first few years, there's something called a tinkering period. You're still experimenting, and then suddenly there's something that you think will work. And then there's hard years, right? You work really hard building a product around that concept, putting things together. And then suddenly, your first few users start sticking on and there's a growth point. And after that, the growth point becomes surging growth, right? Things get really fast and start going really, really quickly. And that's usually when you start making revenue. So that growth point or that inflection point is called the hockey stick. With most products, you can expect spending 3-4 years in that period between tinkering and just before the growth point, and then expect to see a rise. So you can't expect that you run a beta, everything is successful, and then a few months later you're making millions of dollars. It doesn't work like that. It takes years. Right, so you can see here's Airbnb's hockey stick. They struggled from August 2008 to almost November or almost February of 2011. That's 3 years, and that is when they started picking up. Right, that is when the hockey stick was reached, and they kept going higher and higher and higher. They were rejected by many VCs before this. So remember, it takes years for an audience to adopt your product. You have to keep tracking everything to make sure you get that highest potential audience as quickly as possible. So some tips I want to give you when you run your beta. My best and usually most complex ideas have often failed. People surprisingly fall for simplicity. Like, simplicity works. This is not because they were bad ideas, because people have many things to bother about. If you keep your product simple and rely on industry standards for the basics, things get easier. People are also very lazy and don't want to learn unless incentivized heavily. This is why discount works in early days. If you have something new, you should ideally discount it, because otherwise people are not going to care about it that much and they're just too lazy to learn about it. When one of the first email automation tools came out many years ago, they had to spend millions of dollars in educating customers, because until that point, nobody had heard about marketing automation. right? Email marketing automation. Nobody had heard about it. So they had to spend a lot of money trying to create awareness, only after which their product was adopted. For example, don't try to reinvent the sign-up system or the profile photo upload system. Don't build things from scratch unless that is specifically your app's unique selling proposition. Don't try to build a sign-up system all over again. Use a third-party sign-up system. Use a Node package or a Ruby gem or one of those things to make sure that you can just use some conventions. You don't have to build encryption again unless your product specifically does encryption. So unless that is your core feature, don't reinvent it. Use a third-party solution. Right? So for example, at Avalon, we use something called Device because we write code in Ruby on Rails in the backend on some of our projects, which is just a common sign-up system, sign-in system. It handles everything for us. If we want LinkedIn sign-in or if we want Google sign-in or Facebook sign-in, it's one line of code instead of us writing that all over again. You don't have to do it. Right? So on the left, you can see that some attributes increase the attractiveness of your product and some attributes decrease the attractiveness. Laboriousness, practice, training, awareness building, all of that decrease the attractiveness of your product. So building something too unique, that could actually lead to your downfall because people might just be too lazy to spend time on it, right? And that's the serious thing. In fact, one of the main reasons people overlook things is because they're too busy or they're too lazy. If a person is completely bored, he's very likely to use your product, however terrible it is. In fact, people are likely to self-administer shocks to themselves if they're bored. But the opposite of boredom means they don't have time for you, which means make it easier to use. So conventions are a good way to avoid you from reinventing the wheel. So instead of you having this back and forward button on your website, you know that people use the back and forward button on the browser. So why would you go out and reinvent that? Right? So similarly, the best way to understand conventions is to use a lot of popular products. The best product managers are power users of other products. I use a lot of different products, so I know what good conventions are. My good friend and co-author of Pajama Profit, Abhinav Chikara, runs something called UISources.com, which is free in his free time. It runs you through common product patterns. So if you want to know how companies like Facebook or Airbnb or Headspace or many different apps in the world, how they run through their product patterns, what their conventions are, you can actually look at UISources.com. Right? I can actually show you that in a second. Hang on. Let's do that. Right? And as you can see, you can just click on any one of these products and you can see what their onboarding is like. You can see what they're browsing. And one of the reasons I use this is because I don't have to sit and log into multiple different apps or download them. I can just, I can see screen recorded versions of what their flows and how everything works on these different apps. So you can, for example, I can look at TripAdvisor, right? And I can just say, okay, this is how their trip page looks. This is how this page looks. So I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if you want more conventions, you can actually go to goodui.org. It has a bunch of common patterns, things like sign up, sign in, just so you don't reinvent the wheel all over again. So you can also go to goodui.org that has a bunch of common patterns. One thing you can do is you can also go to UISources like I just mentioned. What Abhinav's done is he's actually screen recorded all the interactions on these different apps that you can use. So if you want to know how Uber's sign up process is, if you want to know how TripAdvisor's booking process is, you can know everything, right? You can see all of it, and he's screen recorded videos. One of the advantages of this is that you don't have to download the apps. You don't need to know what the best apps are. He's already featured them. You don't need to sign up, sign in, pay any money, nothing. All of it is available live on his website. So I love this. I use it all the time. So you don't need to download or pay for anything. The site is free. Everything we recommend on Meta, most of the things we recommend on Meta are free. So check it out. We also use something called User Brain and User Testing, which is actually a site where you put in your website or your app, and other real people actually go on that website or app and they give you live feedback. So they actually talk about your app. And you can get a voice recording of what they said while they're scrolling through your app. Now there are many other tools that you can use while running a beta. You can use tools like Crazy Egg or Kissmetrics that give you an idea of where the user is left. It gives you a heat map of the website. But in my opinion, all of that is a little bit of overkill. Right? At the end of the day, with the beta, you should be talking to your customer. Right? As soon as they're done with the demo, if they're using the demo, you should be talking to them and asking them, do you like it? Are you using it? And at the end of the day, I can usually tell how well an app is doing in its first month of beta by looking at its cohorts data. right? If people are coming back, if there's retention without you having to send too many emails and alerts and notifications, it means that your app works. And it might not be everyone on your app that has beautiful cohorts. It might just be 10% of your audience that has very, very high engagement, and that's the audience that you need to scale or expand on. And you can always do that with data as long as you're tagging and tracking where they're all coming from. So that's why data is super important. Get your Google Analytics, get your mix panel right. Any one of the two would do. Thank you for being on this episode. Catch you in the next one.